Hi, lovely ones. Welcome to another Magic of the Pearl Pentacle conversation. And this time I am speaking to Hilary Buffum, who was raised in the reclaiming tradition and remains in the reclaiming tradition, and is a teacher and an artist and a dancer and an actor and a community nerd and many, many things, as we will learn and as you will discover should you read her essay in this book, which I have a mock-up of it here. I don't yet have the book, but this is a mock-up. Hi, Hillary. How are
Hi,
you?
Theo.
How are you going today?
It goes. The sun was out today. It was a little warmer, which was nice. It's been very cold in the so-called Bay Area over here,
Hmm.
so that was lovely. So I'm going okay. How about you?
Yeah, same. Yes. So, so you have written this essay for this book because we asked you to, and you said yes. And it is called "We Are the Wisdom of Our Living Tradition," which I believe you and I came up with based on something you said at the end of the essay. Because obviously, when we write books and create essays and edit books, 3 years pass. So when I say I think, it's because I think. I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, you're in the wisdom section, and in the way that we're moving through the points in this book, this goes from love to law, as if we're running the current through the body up into the, if we compass it in the body into the left hand, because we decided to go with the older structure of the points. Um, you grew up in the reclaiming tradition, which that this is not unique about you, but it's unique about a lot of people who are adults and who are witches and or pagans in the Western world. It is unique still, although it's happening more and more and has happened more and more for people to have been raised in a pagan or witchcraft tradition. And I'm wondering what that was like for you. I guess it was your life, but and is your life, but what are some things about that that you realized were unique about that experience?
Yeah, it's so funny. Like you said, it is one of those things where it was like sort of the water that I swam in. Like I didn't necessarily notice, but it showed up in like I think about, like nobody tried to tell me fairies didn't exist when I was like it was like there was none of this. And then you get old enough and the magic goes away. I think it was this thing of like, and then you get old enough and the magic gets more complex.
Yes.
And so that I think is something that's unique about it. I think also, being raised in reclaiming specifically, there's this entwinement of magic and activism that's like very specific, that it's like about relationship to self and to energy and to deity and to you know, green bloods and red bloods and all the creatures and, the more than human and other than human, depending on how you. I'm never sure what words I like to use when I'm
Yeah.
talking about these things, because for me, that's the other thing that I think it is, that for me, it is felt first
Hmm.
and articulated later.
Hmm.
And sometimes I end up in a teaching situation or in a community situation where like everyone has read all the books,
Hmm.
has read. I still haven't read all of Spiral Dance. I've definitely read much of it, but um, and so sometimes I show up to a conversation from this sort of like felt immersed, like water that I swam in kind of perspective. And then folks are like, but what about this passage? And I'm like, didn't read that.
Yeah.
So for me, it's about both the things that I was taught, but also the things I wasn't like made to unlearn, you
Totally.
know?
I love that. Yes, I relate to it from a Balinese perspective. So I totally am with you. Like that idea of like no one ever told me that transpossession or spirits or magic was not real, and in fact could in fact be your calling. So I totally get it. But specifically in reclaiming, as someone who came to reclaiming 15 years ago, as someone also in other witchcraft traditions, your immersion in the water and air of reclaiming is so fascinating to me because yeah, you're someone who's so felt sense. I can see and perceive that about you, and it's such a treasure, to the tradition because, even the people who are the mothers of the tradition didn't grow up in the tradition, and they had to do so much unlearning as most people do who realize they're witches or who want to, or who realize they're pagan or who want to practice witchcraft. So I'm curious, like you also were raised with living mentors and elders and people who had to work shit out and people who were taught by people who had to work shit out and still had to work shit out. And you even have some stories and experiences where you were the teacher for people decades older than you. That's a very precious experience in the so-called West. How what wisdom has that given you? Maybe that, I mean, you did write an essay about it, but just off the top of your head or from the fountain of your heart, what wisdom do you carry from these relationships with the living and the dead?
Yeah, I mean, I like for me, I think that one of the gifts that both come from like my family of blood and the way that they constructed family and raised me, which like reclaiming was a large part of that. But also from this tradition, was like, and I think there were things that, like you said, it's been 3 years since I wrote it. So I don't remember how much of this ended up in the final copy and how much of it didn't. But something that I was really trying to figure out how to share with folks is the like way in which my experience of reclaiming has this, essence of like, we say you are your own spiritual authority and community, but I think that like on a deeper and more felt sense and like magical level for me, there is this piece about like the inherent wisdom of individuals showing up in tradition. And one of the biggest gifts that, I had was that some of these mothers and grandmothers and elders of our tradition like looked at me as like a 6-year-old and were like, so what do you see?
Hmm.
And like really held that on the same level as someone who was 16 and someone who was 50 and someone who was 80, that there was, you know, like obviously they were teaching the knowledge of the tradition, that, like here are some safety protocols, here is how we, you know, how we know how to share reverence and with spirit and how we know how to do ritual. But that if I was like, hey, when I do this, this is how I feel, there was not only room, but like, oh, tell me more.
Hmm.
And so for me, um, there is that piece. And I think, yeah, it's, I could go on a long tangent about, that. But to me, in my experience, especially with like, even though I went to a lot of reclaiming ritual as like a very, very small child, that like a lot of my first like things that I think of as like my reclaiming experiences were at witchlets. And to
Hmm.
me, the family camp, and to me that space to play, but that the things that were discovered there or communicate, not, I think discovered is even not the right word, but the wisdom that that is communicated in a space that is like deeply intergenerational,
Hmm.
um really allows the like community wisdom to grow in depth. And I think that it is that like through the foundation of elders and community members who are willing to like recognize that there is wisdom in all generations and
Yeah.
to examine their own,
Yeah.
assumptions in relationship to that, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I think it's both the well and the frontier in a way, to use a kind of problematic term. But it's like when I think of indigenous cultures and my experience of intact culture that is alive and animist and, spirit working and ceremonial and there is always so much wisdom in every age, every body, and I think there's a tension between, some roots of the modern witchcraft revival were specifically in coven-based initiatory witchcraft that has influenced reclaiming, of course, that is, you have to be 18 or 21 and it doesn't concern, in fact, it is fully divorced from children, right? And there's a
Mm-hmm.
place for covens for adults, of course, but you can't grow or experience the fullness of what I understand to be the mystery of witchcraft or the earth or the cosmos without relating to people of all realities, including children. And I think there is a place for adult camps. I think that is great. I love that, for instance, Cloudcatcher Witch Camp has this bridging phenomenon, which isn't perfect and has issues, but where, it's like an all ages camp versus an adult or a family camp. So it's trying to like figure out another way. But I love that there's Witchlets and, Redwood Family Camp and you were a part of also, I don't know if it happens anymore, but you were a part of Teen Earth Magic, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I was. It's not currently operational, and I think that it's um if it were to come back, it might be in a different form, but that
Mhm.
grew out of specifically like there was such I wasn't a part of the first cohort of teenagers that were a part of this, but I think it was, and I may miss somebody, but I think it was Rihanna and George and Jonathan and Seed. I think were the teachers at that time. I feel like I'm missing someone, and if I am so sorry, my lore. But they were teaching what was at the time the only path at Witchlets. There was one path, and it was for the teenagers. And then that slowly grew out into there being paths for every age group. But they were in that space and they were doing magic, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, this is so much. There's so much desire and joy and juicy magic going on here. What if this was a whole camp?"
Mm.
And to me, I loved that space because that experimental wisdom of, you know, and like creativity around ritual structure and uh, uh, relationship to story and relationship to each other and willingness to experiment was really beautiful. And I know we sometimes there were folks in the community who were not so into the ways in which we would write parody versions of every chant or do an entire ritual backwards or try these different things, but there was this container with I keep using the word container, but there was this camp that was we would I sometimes think about all the things that came out of that space that were really generative and like trying to figure out how to share them with the wider community and the like completely silly things that didn't work. But I would like try to explain. There was one year where I was like mentoring at Teen Earth Magic, so I was sort of like student teaching essentially. They didn't call it
Mm.
student teaching,
Mm.
and then I promptly went to California Witch Camp afterwards.
Mm.
Um, we had done. We used to hold the talent show inside of a ritual at Teen Earth Magic, and we had done this thing where we um, uh, cast the circle, did a ritual, raised a cone of power, and then suspended it over the talent show,
Great. Love it.
and then funneled it into a bowl full of beads, and everybody got to take a bead away.
Yeah. I mean, I've done similar ritual.
Yeah, right. And it was, but it was one of those moments where it was like it felt totally, out there. And I remember trying to explain it to some folks around a dinner table at California Witch Camp, and the eyeballs of the people that I was talking, they were like, what?
Hmm.
And so just that moment of like, and other people were really excited. They were like, oh yeah, I've done something like that. Or, oh, that's really cool. I want to see what that looks like.
Hmm.
So anyway, I, I'm not sure where that tangent fits into all of this, but I do feel like there is, that creative space for young people to take the like structures of our tradition and be like, I want to play with this, or I have a question about this.
Yeah.
Um, and the evolution of what became the gender rituals at that camp, which is a whole other lore and story and could talk about for a while. But um, I do think that people like those conversations we used to have like a more blood mysteries type ritual and things that were, and then there were conversations, and all of a sudden the ritual that was for those who were gender expansive, it was like the whole camp. And then there were like a couple people that wanted and this was over several years, but those evolutions became then folks who went to the Dandelion in 2012 to be a
Hmm.
part of the rewriting of the Principles of Unity, which I was not a part of that contingent, but um, so these things are all interwoven.
They
Um,
totally are. And it's so I knew only pieces of that, and I just got even more a sense of like contagious pride listening to that because I came into reclaiming in 2010. So, and very fast, as I'd already been teaching the craft quite publicly anyway, I got fast tracked into student teaching, which happens to a few of us. It's not ideal, but it's happened sometimes, right? And so I really had to like I went out of my way because I'm a pretty all or nothing kind of person to be like, okay, who are the elders and people I need to learn from? So of course, I like stuck to certain people like glue, like Rosemary Dance and Raven Stanfield and but again, like listening to that story, because I was at that 2012 Dandelion and I saw those, how old was I in 2012? I can't remember. Like, but not that much older than these kids, no, they weren't kids, I don't know, 18-year-olds, who however old they were, 15 maybe, but these trans and gender diverse witches who were so self-possessed, and probably nervous as fuck, who stood in front of hundreds of people, including some mothers of the tradition, and said some really important stuff that really shifted things. And I think that's the edge. The edge. I think Urania once said to me that I'm sure she says you have to be with the children. What the children are saying or what the younger people are doing, that's the edge. You have to be on that edge. And I think that's really wise. Bring the collective accumulative wisdom of tradition and lineage and the elders, but who's it serving if not the descendants? So so I think that's really rich, and I think in many ways that's what you're pointing directly at. I'm curious if, you speak about two people who are beloved to both of us, who are part of our mighty dead now, who are Rosemary Dance and Copper Persephone, and you were close to them and you learnt from them, especially Copper. Like, what do you have to I don't know, say about the wisdom that was birthed between you?
yeah. Um, yeah. I it's sometimes it's hard to I'm like just gonna take a breath for a minute.
Yes, please.
Uh there's so much that I learned from Copper. And, I like as a teenager and young adult, like, you know, spent a lot of time, uh, you know, specifically taking her classes. And, when I could, at Witchlets, when it was the right age lineup, I would take her path. And so, like, I think that, I organized with her for many years. And so, like, much of the way that I learned how to, craft an intention or, you know, some of the facilitation things I do come from her knowledge and her mentorship, but I feel like, much of the like things that I learned from Copper came from like our friendship and
Mhm.
our relationship that was um in and amongst those that the drives to and from which camp and the sweeping up after a class because I was doing work trade or whatever. And um for me, I write about this a little bit in the essay, but her willingness with me to um mess up and then own it
Mm.
and then change what she did
Yeah.
was something that um was an incredible gift that she gave me in that, like, and I write about a specific instance in the essay about like, I was trying to find my identity and she was trying to be supportive and ended up causing a little bit of harm and limiting and sending me into
Mhm.
a bit of a spiral. And I think at this point, a number of years later, I was able to be like, hey, and she her essay in the Elements book that
Mm.
you birthed into being, there is a line in there that I know changed
Mm.
because of that conversation and the
Mm.
conversations that came out of it and the way she helped me edit my essay and the way she helped me facilitate conversations and things of that nature. So there's that piece. And then um again, a longer conversation. And I know there are other parts of the book that reference her dying process.
Mm.
Um, but one of the other pieces of like wisdom and mentorship that she gifted me was the ability to participate in her dying process, and help, care for her energetically. And she asked me to sew her burial shroud, which was a big ask, and then ended up being, you know, just at like it was June of 2020. So nobody, the knowledge about the COVID pandemic was very low, and the risk and the fear was very high, and trying to figure out how to navigate, for me on a practical level, there were no fabric stores open and I had not sourced the fabric for this. And I had to figure out how to sew it in a very fast amount of time. But the amount of community gathering that happened, even when no one could be indoors with each other, and there was
Ah,
all these logistics. And she was like, I was watching the art of dying well, is how I
yeah.
felt, and dying like, and in a world that is so death phobic,
Yeah.
there was this like we I in moments of deep grief and community, I was there were these moments where I would laugh and I would just say, of course, we're all losing our minds, stuck in our houses, can't see each other, haven't been able to gather. And of course, Copper would die at this moment. So we all have to come together and take care. Like in her last moment was bringing community together for her, but also for us. And so I don't know how that relates, but that is some of my relationship to Copper, and we could talk for hours. But
Yeah, we really could because I too have stories. I only knew her for 5 years. I mean, I know her now too, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
I met her at BC Witch Camp because we were on that team and it was the 2016 BC Witch Camp. I had heard of her a lot from many of our mutual beloveds, but we were finally on a team together and we had this whole conversation that night. We were up together having a conversation after pre-camp planning which is really rigorous for those. Like, it's hard to explain what that's like if you've never experienced it. And so we were out of our minds and we were like eating something at like 10 or 11 p.m. And I was so jet lagged and I don't know what she was going through, probably a lot. And then, yeah, we had this like mini debate and it was about some things close to our hearts. And, I remember she was so open to listening. Um, yeah, it was wild. Anyway, I love her dearly and yeah, your love for her and your love for Rose and your love for Seed, who is very much alive, like that came through this essay too. And I think one of the things that I love about the reclaiming tradition that constantly brings me, which I think is one of its deepest wisdoms and brings me always back to it. I like I've had some times with everything I'm involved in, and I've definitely had times where I'm like reclaiming, fuck off. Um, but the immense power of community and the magic that we share and the intergenerational wisdom that we foster together, it can only be done together. And there's a human love that is very much an expression of our animal nature and our divine reality that is like so powerfully expressed in reclaiming in ways that bring me to tears. And yeah, so I feel like you really captured that in your essay. So thank you very much for that. Are there any like, we're living in, I mean, I think human histories are always deeply calamitous and distressing. Um, like honestly, empire and colonization has been going on for quite some time. Um, Obviously there is a new reality happening in the US that is an outcome of many years of conservative organizing and culture collision and colonization and all of that. What do you feel is what is inspiring you from the wisdom that you grew up with or have summoned with people through friendship and conflict that might be holding your hand right now through these times that are distressing and horrible?
Yeah, it is. This is a question that I am asking myself regularly because it is gnarly, which is the possibly the most Californian thing I could have just said, but we'll leave that there. Um, uh, for me, there's sort of um there are so many ways and so many threads here, but I'm gonna pull on this one, and then there's another one here that I'm gonna come to in a second. But in relationship to reclaiming and being raised in reclaiming, um, it's that activist lineage piece that is coming back and coming up for me in that one of the catalysts of like that the first, you know, Brigid ritual in San Francisco was after the inauguration, or around the inauguration of Richard Nixon, and in response, like that there were water rituals that came out of that, and and that ritual alongside resistance is, the lifeblood, like one of the core and center of this lineage that I'm a part of. Um, and sometimes when I say that, I can be like, and we have to take to the streets, and like for me right now, it's the gathering. And that's the sort of like wisdom and lineage that I am holding to when I have a hard time holding all that is right now, and the reality for so many that myself, but also so many that I care about. And when the like fear is louder than the logic or the resistance, or is that the wisdom of gathering, um, in the simplicity of, you know, ritual and community and meal sharing. And I think of like both the gathering in the streets and the spiral dances that are written into history and relationship of reclaiming in that way. But I also think of the Red Dragon dinners around the HIV and AIDS crisis, where they toasted the red living blood of the
Mhm.
people who were experiencing this virus and the unknowns around it, and the people who, the living elders in our tradition who were a part of,
Yeah.
midwife deaths of queer folk,
Yeah.
and the ones who were willing to go into hospitals. And for me, one of the immense privileges that I have as someone raised in reclaiming it, and that I come into contact with as I get to know more and more, you know, queer folk in my life, is that I know queer elder. I have an abundance
Mhm.
of incredible queer elders
Yeah.
that are alive, and they can tell me not just about it broadly,
Mm.
but about their specific experience of it and how to survive. And they can tell me what about right now scares them,
Yeah.
because they're like, hey, this is scary because X.
Yeah.
And they can tell me we survived this because Y.
Yeah.
And let us make magic, let us make potions, let us make meals. And that's what's getting me through. That's what they did. That these people who survived it, who are my elders, who I get to have, and most queer folk don't, or not yet. But I and the people in, who hold a myriad of identities, but for me, the queer identity feels very, very present right now, is me and the people who taught me to pull apart my own relationship to gender in those rituals at Teen Earth Magic, who were my peers and are my peers and are my teachers. I want us and the kiddos that I teach at Witchlets, who are like 6 and trans, and telling me about, like, we are going to survive to be those queer elders.
Yeah.
And it's because of marching in the streets, but also tea parties and holding people's hands while they die, and little gardens. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for making me cry.
Yeah.
And like it's true. Like I know some of these same people are my dear friends, and knowing them has like, yeah, changed me. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we get to be connected to this like bizarro conclave, mysterious labyrinth all over the world of these reclaiming witches who really have been some of the most world-changing people, because of exactly what you just said. So thank you so much for conjuring that wisdom, because that helps me, and I'm sure it will help many people to hear that.
They're
So
real people.
yeah,
They
they're real.
they're not just the mythology of what
Yeah,
they've done. They like have messy cars, and they like show up when I do like a big theater production, but like they like have messy cars, or like make mistakes, or
yeah,
always lose their public transit card, or like to me, I feel like that's also important, that it's not this, you know that they're like both the ones who will put a band-aid on my knee when I tripped and fell when I was the little kid, and also the ones who are doing the world changing magic of existing and resisting.
truly.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, I need to go and sob. Life giving away. Thank you so much, Hilary. Thank you so much for writing this essay and gifting it to this resource of the Pearl Pentacle, this is the magic of the Pearl Pentacle. Everything you just said is a lived reality that radiates from the luster of Often when we're teaching Pearl Pentacle, we'll say, hey, the way that these pearls are formed in these mollusks is actually pretty devastating. It's this irritant comes in and it's horrible for that creature. And they're trying to eject it. They're trying to make it the pain go away. So they cover it with this nacre or nacre or however we're meant to pronounce the mother of pearl substance. And yet there it is, this lustrous, profound thing, this pearl, which, it's also quite violent to extract from these creatures. So, but if we just think about the fact that they even exist in the rivers, in the oceans, just because of that, that's profound. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hilary. And I hope you all, this was slightly longer, but I think it needed to be. So thanks everyone for listening and being with that. Bye.